The book of Esther, chapter 4, I want to read this little section here first, and then we'll go back and catch some things here that I think we can definitely not just learn from, but be inspired by as far as Esther is concerned. This will be from the NIV. I'm starting in verse 1. It's kind of jumping into the middle of the story, just so you know what's going on is Esther. Let me give you a background first. What Esther has done is become the queen. She did that because, obviously, the king had lots of choices, and all those choices came before the king, and they weren't just looking at beauty, although the scriptures do describe her as being a very beautiful woman. They were also looking for intelligence. They were looking for character and integrity. They were looking for a wife for the king that would be an asset to his reign. That role brought with it some responsibilities that were political and diplomatic and things like that. And she was the person that he fell in love with, and the person at the same time that met all of that criteria for a strong, capable queen. Now, with all of that strength and with all of that capability, also did come a certain, what's the right word? A certain rank. And even as queen, she was not like it wasn't like Disney fairy princess queen. It was real queen, which means there are limitations. And in the world that she was in, because of the way they viewed both sovereignty, marriage, men and women, and all those things, even as a queen, she did not have the power to just do or stop whatever she wanted to do or stop whatever she wanted to stop. That's very important that we kind of get that before we get into this story, because sometimes our view of a queen is that while the king has the responsibility of being the king, the queen gets to play in the background and get whatever she wants. And that's not reality, not at all, and certainly not in her case. We'll see that, just how limited she was when we look at some of the challenges that she faced as she sought to do the right thing. But it's important for us to kind of have all of that in our minds. Extra little bit of information there if you're not familiar with Esther. Of course, Esther is a Jew. This is not a Jewish kingdom. This is not a Jewish king. He is a very worldly king. They are the occupying force that has reduced Israel to rubble, and there are people within this country, especially Haman, who had some bureaucratic power, who really would like to have just gotten rid of the Jews. So we're dealing with a circumstance where you have politicians pushing for genocide against Israel. So not a lot has changed in the last 3,500 years, has it? But this is happening, and that is the reality, and that's where we pick up in this story. She has already been chosen as the queen. They're already married, yada, yada, yada. And now what you've got is a circumstance where people's lives hang in the balance, and their only hope is an undercover, because she has told no one that she is a Jew, an undercover Jewish queen in the middle of the enemy's household. So that's where we are, okay? When Mordecai is her adopted father. More background. Mordecai is her adopted father. She is Mordecai's uncle's daughter. Okay, so you got that going on. He has become her father, not by birth, but by reality. He has raised her, and she is also, or he is her mentor, and where she goes to for wisdom, and that's important too, as we see in her story. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes. He hears about how Haman has arranged for this upcoming genocide. He puts on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Little bit of understanding there. Sackcloth and ashes are about two things. Mourning, not just mourning because they're in fear, but mourning because they realize, if this is going to happen, what have we done? Sackcloth and ashes are often a sign of repentance. Their first response was to go to the Lord, repentant, and say, Lord, please spare us. And they pray, and they show outwardly their mourning and their wailing, and they fast. Okay, so they turn immediately to the Lord. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. That's a weird response, isn't it? Oh, I don't want you to look like you're all worried like that. Maybe just a caring thing to do, but he couldn't accept that. Verse 5. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to attend to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go to the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Verse 10, then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. And so Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So what we know about the story, or what we want to know about the story, is that she does go in. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 are all about her and all that's going on and all of this ordeal with Haman. And it's not as simple as she then gets up and walks in there. They have to deal with him and all of this stuff because it is a really complicated situation. You would think it's easy, right? Because she's the queen. She should be able to go in and talk to her husband whenever she wants. Again, that's not how it worked in this Middle Eastern country 2,500 years ago. It's just not how it worked. So she has some obstacles to get there. You also had this very powerful politician who is using bribery and influence behind the scenes and some trickery and lying and everything else and deceit in order to get his way. And it's working. It's working. You know, we talk a lot these days about different conspiracy theories, some of which are ridiculous and silly, but sometimes do people conspire? Yes, they do. Sometimes do people lie and commit deceit behind the scenes? Yes, they do. And sometimes does it have very dire effects? Yes, it does. And that's the case here with Esther. It's a real problem. It's a real conspiracy. And hundreds of thousands of people will die if no one does anything. By the time they find out about it, it is not just a conspiracy. It is the law of the land. And there has to be some finagling, a good conspiracy, in chapters 5, 6, and 7 in order to reverse that edict. It was not even as simple as the king doing that. It's very similar to the situation that Nebuchadnezzar finds himself in and Darius finds himself in with Daniel and with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where the king passes the law and then regrets it because of the circumstances. It's very much a similar thing like that, and it's harder to change laws sometimes than people think, as we know in our own time. And ours are, frankly, probably easier to change than theirs are. Certainly should be. When Mordecai first sends news to Esther she does not immediately say, oh, I can fix this. And we need to remember that, because she is definitely one of these who me people, because her first response is, oh, I can get it done. Her first response is, Mordecai, I don't know that I can help. Sometimes that's where we find ourselves. We see circumstances, whatever they are, big, small, within your home, within society as a whole, in the big picture, or whatever. We see things all the time where we look at it and we say, well, I don't know if I can help with that. I don't know what I would do about that. And it doesn't mean that there isn't anything that we can do. It means that we may not know what it is that we can do. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we are the ones, not like Esther, where she's just someone who can help, but where we are the ones who have gotten ourselves into a mess, and we don't know how to get out of it. Maybe the result of sin, sometimes just the result of being boneheaded. It's not always a sin to be boneheaded, although sometimes the consequences are almost as bad. And we don't know how to fix it. What do we do when we don't know? What do we do? Who do we go to? They had some definite reactions about who they went to, and I think we can learn from those. And they had some things that they did that we can learn from. And so that's what I want to look at. One of the first things is Mordecai. He has a real grasp on the seriousness. It seems kind of obvious to us. We're looking at this. We have more details than Esther did, okay? We get to see all the behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on. If you read the whole book, and I suggest that you do, you will have already, before Mordecai knows what's going on, you will know what's going on. Because those are the details that God has given us in the record. But if you put yourself in her shoes, it might be easy for you to say, oh, my husband would never do that. But he wasn't the only one acting, was he? There were some bad actors and characters in the background who definitely were doing evil and definitely plotting against the Jews. Mordecai saw this, and when he saw it, he recognized it for what it was, which is often what we need, because we just don't always see our own mistakes. Last Monday, I had to submit a paper. It's driving me crazy, by the way. I had to submit a paper. Because of my trip to Guatemala, I thought, hopefully I will get to do a little bit of work on this while I'm there. I got to not even open up my iPad and look at it the whole time that I was there. So Monday was due at midnight. At 11:54 and 57 seconds, I turned my paper in, okay? Just to give you an idea. I was really rushed. It wasn't a hard paper. I thought about it a lot. It was just finding the time to actually sit down and do it. And last Monday was a hard time. I thought I would have the afternoon. I didn't, because you all saw my grass if you ever went to Zephyr in the last week. So it was bad. I had to mow. I had to do laundry. I had to do, normal everyday stuff when you come back from being gone. And I had to get all of that done too. Everything seemed to have the same deadline. And I'm working through this paper, and I'm trying to get it done. And I knew what I wanted to say, and that part was fine. But after I turned it, this is the way it is. If you text me, you know this is true. My brain spells checked after it hits send, right? That's the way that works. And usually most misspellings in my texts are actually words I got right, and Apple decided I was wrong and put something else in there. And I don't like that. Anyway, that wasn't what happened Monday, but that happens to me a lot. So I hit send, and speaking of conspiracies, the other day, I noticed something that I suspected was true but couldn't prove, and then I saw it. I hit send, and the little word over here went bloop and changed the spell check as I hit send. That's evil, because you can't undo that. That is wrong. Anyway, that happened. So I upload this paper, and it all looked great. Everything in the software said, yeah, there's no misspelling, no grammar problems, just you send it. So I sent it. But this is what I do. After I upload the paper on Monday, on Tuesday morning, I go, I'll look at the thing one more time. It's too late, but that's just what I do. And so just like I read my texts after I hit send and go, oh. Anyway, I go back and I look at the paper. It's all fine, Well, I think so. We'll see. I haven't gotten a grade yet. But I think it's fine, except for two, sure, on Tuesday Grammarly works, 2 typos, just minor typos, a space where it doesn't belong, And the word call, that should be calls, is missing its S. These are not big deals, but the whole class is about format and checking your work. I don't like that either, you know? Man, I hate that. Here's why I just told you that story. Pray for me. I'm just calling you to prayer. Apparently, two little typos just drive me absolutely up a wall. But I share it for this reason. It was too late at night. What I would normally do is print that off, hand it to Tanya, and ask her. Because we don't see our own mistakes. We don't see them. I know there's not supposed to be a space in there, so I don't see that space between the word and the comma because I wouldn't have put it there, so why would it be there? So let's move on. I don't see the missing letter there because in my brain, the letter's there, right? But it's not there. And if you write papers, you know what I'm talking about. You just flat don't see them. I used to be terrible. I've gotten better about doubling words. So if I said, I'm going to the store, I might type, I'm going to the store. I don't stutter in real life, but apparently thumbs. And so I would add an extra "the." I did it a lot. I mean, a lot. Drove me nuts. I would do it in handwriting. In fact, I might have done it more when I was writing and just forget that I already wrote that word and just keep going. I'm not going to see that. Okay? I'm not going to notice the extra word. I have to have somebody else look at that. What about things that are way more important than typos? Do we trust our vision of our life well enough to think we don't need another perspective? That we don't need someone else's eyes? Do we trust the decisions we make well enough that we don't need somebody else to say, I'm not sure that looks like that's the right thing? That would only be carelessness, like with my typing, pride, I don't want to hear what other people's perspective might tell me to change. Just not pride, but maybe reckless enthusiasm. Oh, no, I got it. But it's not a good thing. We need other eyes on the situation. The other thing is sometimes we need other eyes to tell us what they see going on around us. It might not be a mistake we've made. It might be situational awareness. You need somebody else sometimes sitting at your table with their back to the wall watching the door, right, Curly? I'm a sit with my back to the wall watching the door kind of a person, okay? That was part of missions training. You're going to be in a foreign country. Weird people do things. They do things you won't understand. Always have your eyes on the exits. A little situational awareness. It's a good thing. You keep seeing the same guy everywhere you go in Russia, that dude is FSB. I guarantee it, okay? You just know it didn't happen to me, but it happened to one of my teammates. He kept running into the same tourist in a non-tourist town. That was no tourist. He did find that out for a fact later. That was no tourist. And he figured that out just kind of by gut and then confirmed it with somebody with the eyes to see and the knowledge to know because her uncle ran the local KGB office at the time. So you need sometimes somebody else to be able to say to you, listen, you may not see this, but here's what's happening. We need those people in our lives. Esther needed that. And it's an act of humility to listen. It's an act of humility we need to listen. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're not observant. It doesn't mean anything negative about you. It means you're not God. You don't see everything. But God has put some people in your life that will help you to do it. Listen. When they see things, listen. It may save your life. It might save your soul. The second thing is this. As we need those trusted voices in our life, we need to acknowledge that sometimes it's not going to be about us at all. Esther was pretty isolated from what was going on. Mordecai addresses that. He says, listen, do you think that if you're the only one left, this isn't going to come around to you? We may think, that's not my circus. Those aren't my monkeys. I don't need to deal with this. Life's not always about us. We're kind of in a trend where God's calling is always something about us. It's something to make us happy. It's something to make us special. It's something to make us stand out. But sometimes God's calling is about us individually at all. This was not about Esther at all. It was about saving an entire race of people who were about to be slaughtered. The part that was about Esther was, Esther, you can do something about this. True, you don't have to. You can sit by. But understand, that comes with consequences. And that is what Mordecai tells her. Let's go down to verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But, read this part carefully, this phrase. Look at the tenses. But, you and your father's family will perish. We like to jump to the next sentence because that sounds cooler, right? But do you see what he told her? Esther, this is bigger than you. You don't have to do anything, but don't think that if you don't, that you really escape it. Your household won't be left alone. It'll perish. And the tense he uses is not it could perish. He tells her it will. God sometimes gives us tasks so big, so not about us. Therefore go into all the world. That it ceases to be about us, but our refusal to do it will become about us. We don't fulfill that task, this household will just disappear and blow away in the wind. That's a pretty severe consequence. It'll be of our own making if that's the decision we were to make. He tells her it'll be the same for you, Esther. This will be the end of it. It'll all be over for you. But God will still, he doesn't use the word God, but God will still provide somebody else. Mordecai's faith, and Esther's faith as well, is so genuine and real throughout all this, that even though the book never mentions God by name, and it doesn't. First time somebody told me that, I did not believe them, because I'd read it several times. Well, of course, he's all over the place. And he is. He's on every page. In their faith, though not mentioned by name, Mordecai appeals to the providence of God and says, you don't have to do it. Somebody else will be raised up. Well, who's raising them up? Somebody else will be raised up. But you won't have answered your calling. And so you won't make the lasting impact, and your family will be dust. And it's not a threat. It's the reality. Then he says the famous line, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Mordecai, by faith, is seeing Esther's position not just as a convenience, not just as, oh, it's a good thing I've got this adopted daughter in the king's house. No, he sees this for what it is. He says, for what we know, you may have been put right here in this place at this time. He doesn't use his name, but who's he talking about? Who's the putter? Who's the planter? Who's the one who put you in the garden where you are? That's the Lord. And how do we know what we are, where we are, in our time and in our place? Because this person over here needs to know Jesus. Because this person over here needs something to eat today. Because this child over here needs a mentor just like Esther did. Maybe you're somebody's Mordecai. Not just somebody's Esther. You may be somebody's Mordecai. There may be a superhero Esther who needs a godly adult in their life to encourage them and help raise them up into another godly adult who will do great things in the name of the Lord. And we may never have any idea what that will be. But how do you know? But what you are, where you are for such a time. That's what he told her, and it's what we still need to hear all the time. So I have this question there. Who is your Mordecai? And do you listen? If you don't have somebody in your life who helps you see things for what they are, find somebody. It'll be easier to find, because I'm also going to tell you, if you aren't being a Mordecai to somebody, you need to be one. You need to be a godly influence. So that means that half the room here is either looking for a Mordecai or looking to be one. You ought to be able to work that out, right? We need more people like that. Every last one of us, no matter how old, mature, young, and enthusiastic, we all need somebody like that in our life. Okay, so she gets the news, but you know what happened. When she first hears about this, she's daunted by the challenges. It's like, Mordecai, I can't just walk in there and talk to him. It doesn't work like that. I don't know if Mordecai knew that or not. Probably. But I don't get the impression that when Mordecai is convicted of something, that the rules matter. I don't get the impression that was a thing to him. He's like, I know, go in there. And he's probably told her that before. So she first sees the obstacles, like a lot of us do. So Mordecai, it's not that simple. There are rules. If he doesn't make the right signal with his scepter, and let's just stop and think about that for a second. Men do not need, and speaking as one, we do not need the power to decide who lives and dies by the little up or down of our scepter. Okay? That's just ridiculous. I know this. Do you think it had buttons on it and it looked like a TV remote? I think it did. I don't know if they knew what that looked like, but I think they're going to dig one up one day and go, what is this, a remote? No, that was the king's scepter. Anyway, we don't need that kind of power, but her husband had it. He didn't have to hear anything he didn't want to hear. Somebody's going, well, that'd be nice. Not at the risk of life. She's genuinely concerned, which tells you something about him. I mean, we know that he ends up letting her in, but the fact that she was concerned means that could have gone either way, and she knew it. She doesn't go in there until she's done a couple of things. One, she voices her concerns, and that's okay. To be a person of faith does not mean that you don't assess things, because she acts on her faith in a way that was only because she took seriously what a dire situation it was. She wasn't in denial. Faith is not denial. She knew her life was at risk. She believed her life was at risk. She tells Mordecai that. This could go badly, Mordecai. That's when he tells her, I know, but. And he reminds her, what's the cost of inaction? What happens if you don't? And so she acts, and she does what she needs to do. When your relatives, when your friends, when your Mordecais come and talk to you, how do you typically respond? Do you listen? Do you know better? Do you yield and take their wisdom? Do you pray on it? What do you usually do? Esther prays. She says, okay, Mordecai, I'll do it, but first, here's what we're going to do. She says, I want you to send this out to all the Jews who are at Susa. They were the ones who knew about what was going on and were already praying. She says, I want you to go and tell them they got to pray. 3 days of this. They're going to pray, and I'm going to pray, and they're going to fast, and I'm going to fast. She made her people in her court fast. Some of them weren't even Jews. They're probably sitting there going, you want me to do what now? We're praying. And they pray for 3 days and nights. Some Middle Eastern traditions, even to this day, you only fast until sundown, and then you get to eat. She's like, no eating at sundown. We are fasting solid 3 days, no food, no water. We need the Lord on this. She said at the end of those 3 days, though, I go in. I live, I live. If I die, I die. But I'm going. That's what she did when she found out what the right thing to do really was and was convicted by Mordecai. Esther, you got to be the one to help. You got to be the one to help. Prayed, called in people to pray with her and for her, because she did not walk into that throne room by herself, did she? God is not mentioned, but was God there? Yes. But she even had God's people with her in prayer. They couldn't go into those courts. They would have been killed. They could pray, and they could fast, and they did. And they had her back spiritually. You need people. I need people. We need people who have our back spiritually all the time. People that we can call on and people that we can trust. If you need confidentiality, you need somebody you can call and say, hey, I need you to pray about this. I have got to face it. It has to be done. I've got to do this, but I'm going to need all the help from God I can get. And if you can be with me in prayer, all the better. Have those people in your life and trust them. Go and pray for them, pray with them, and call on them to go and be prayer warriors for you. Oh, look at that. Just for you. I got ahead of myself one slide, one more time again this week. She had those people. And they were heroes too, weren't they? Every one of those people who denied themselves for 3 days, spent time in prayer. She couldn't have done it without him. She knew that. And they were heroes too. You are to the people you pray for. And we need one another to do that. As a result, you go home and read the book. What happens? What's right is what happened. She marches into that throne room with all the backing of heaven and earth. And the king allows her to speak. It's a little bit of a long story. There's a few tangles in there because of all the things that had to be dealt with. But the people of Israel were saved because God answered prayer through a lady named Esther, who was encouraged and strengthened by a man named Mordecai. And somewhere in there, God has you to be one of those, a Mordecai, an Esther, a part of the crowd praying for strength and guidance and the moving hand of God. Answer that call. Listen to those people. Have those people in your life that speak wisdom and strength and courage to you. And then you'll be amazed at what God does through you. Let's pray together.